I'd now like to introduce today's presenters. Michael Jansen, Chief Research Officer, guides the practice's research agenda and architecture by leveraging his extensive experience to identify and unlock emerging trends. Amy Fong, Vice President, leads the firm's offerings for sourcing and vendor management teams, including marketing intelligence and price benchmarking memberships and custom research. Banushi Malhotra, Senior Analyst, works with sourcing and vendor management leaders on collaborative research and advisory engagements to help them extract the maximum value for their procurement activities. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Michael.
All right, thank you, Cheyenne. And it's great to be with everybody today. Getting ready for the holiday season to come about with us, so it's pretty exciting on that. I'm looking forward to the more muted celebrations, but we'll certainly come on that. Today, I think most of you know Everest Group in terms of our market commentary, how we evaluate suppliers, how we track pricing and trends in the industry. Today is going to be a little different. Today we're going to talk about comparisons between one enterprise and another enterprise. And so we're going to show you one of our Pinnacle studies, and Amy and her team have gone through and done an extensive analysis on this topic. And what we're going to do is walk you through the findings, and we're going to show you what made a certain group of enterprises called the Pinnacle Enterprises, how they stood out and above everybody else. So with that, let's talk about my favorite chart, which is what we call the dot plot chart. And this is our Pinnacle analysis. And what you see on this chart is all of the participants in the study. And what we've done is we've plotted them on two different axes, one with capabilities on the x-axis and the outcomes on the y-axis. And so we have 5 different criteria on the x, on the capabilities. And what we've done is ask a number of questions that allow us to ascertain in each of these general categories into the overall scoring mechanism. From a research analytics standpoint, I'm always looking at these dot plots and trying to make sure that they tell a good story. And in this one, you see if you were to go back to your statistics classes, you see a nice general regression line that would go from the bottom left to the upper right. And that's a good thing because that allows us to talk about the cause and effect of capability versus the outcomes you get. What we're going to do in each of these charts, or many of the charts we're going to do, is we're going to compare those in the upper right, those labeled Pinnacle, with everybody else in the database. So you can get an idea of the cause and effect and what it takes to become one of these high-performing organizations. So with that, let's move into some of the core content outputs here. And I'll just hit on these briefly and then turn it over to Amy. So just at a really big picture perspective here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to show the impact areas across 3 different dimensions: the cost impact, the operational impact, and the business impact. And so each of these things, what Amy's going to talk about is some generalized measurements and indicators, and then we'll break it into specifics.
Thanks, Michael. So as Michael showed on that dot plot, we're really looking at the correlation of outcomes and capability maturity. And so when we look at the outcomes, we break it into these 3 areas. So the highlights here of Pinnacle Enterprises in services category management or services sourcing are better spend visibility from an operational impact, operational capabilities perspective or impact perspective. They had shorter sourcing timelines, were faster to go through the process, just operationally more efficient. And from a business impact, better aligned with the business, more of a key partner, and had improved alignment on the strategic projects where procurement can play a role. So we looked at these, and then we kind of correlate those to the capabilities on the next slide, where we want to understand the how and the what people are doing. So there were 5 capability areas, as you saw in that initial chart, that we looked at. These were all focused around managing services or sourcing services specifically. So the sourcing process for services categories. Didn't list out all the services, but you can think of, we'll show that in a bit in some of the data. You can think of things like marketing services, facilities, IT services, BPO, legal services, so a broad range of categories. And we wanted to see what people are doing that really helps them stand out. Category management, certainly one of the biggest terms, and you'll hear us talk about category management a lot today. What we found was that the Pinnacle Enterprises had much better, well-developed category plans, and they also tended to use more category management best practice tools, things like doing a TCO model or a make versus buy model, really understanding their supply base and analyzing it well and understanding outside markets. They had better types of market intelligence and did more risk assessments. So you'll see there's a section on information and analytics, and we'll hit on the information and analytics a bit more today. I think most of this webinar is actually going to focus on the category management and the information and analytics aspects. The entire study, by the way, for our outsourcing excellence members is on our portal, so you can go through all of the deep detail of these metrics if you're curious. There's some really interesting stuff in there. Three other areas that we'll touch on today, but we deep dove into much more in the survey itself, were stakeholder alignment. So the importance of alignment with functional stakeholders and things like measuring customer satisfaction were big differentiators for the Pinnacle Enterprises. Technology enablement, so tools that enable things like competitive bidding or managing contracts better, needed to be effectively managed, and we saw much better utilization, not just having tools in place, but really using the advanced functionality, things like a contract management tool, using the additional features versus just kind of treating it like a digital file cabinet. Talent management, of course, we all know how important talent is to success of any business or any function. And we found that Pinnacle Enterprises really differentiated here as well. They had things in place like having a differentiated work environment. They focused on soft skills a lot more, things like conflict management and emotional intelligence, but also things like supplier management and relationship management that are incredibly important for procurement teams. So looking at all of this, the conclusion really coming out of the capabilities was that when we look at a Pinnacle-class sourcing organization, they are efficient, they're agile, they're flexible, they tend to be strong in these areas. They tend to be strong in 5 main areas of category management, leveraging market intelligence, effective supplier management and governance, technology leveraged, and automation, process automation that enables better decision making and also shifting of resources to more strategic activities. And then they have a talent focused environment, and of course talent and culture are so important right now. What we did find though, and this is a bit contrarian, I guess, is that, but not necessarily surprising, it's one of the reasons we dug into this area, is that even for Pinnacle organizations, even the ones on the top right in that dot plot, nearly all of those teams still have an opportunity to get better at managing services categories. When you look at how procurement organizations work on the whole, direct functions tend to be fairly mature. Indirect, parts of indirect, certain categories often are more mature than others. These big services categories have nuances that make them more difficult to manage, and that's why we wanted to look specifically at services categories. So we'll talk in a minute about some of the myths that are related to service categories that we found in this study.
So Amy, let's play Mythbusters. Everybody likes to understand the opportunity and here's the myth and reality. Let me start with the first one here. Category management. We've been doing that for a long time. We've got it all fixed up and we're all ready to go, right?
Yeah, well, I think anyone who's out there doing category management or trying to roll out category management processes will probably debate you on this. And I've seen in years of doing category management training, it's not a switch that you flip on. It is a difficult process and mental shift in the way that you work with your stakeholders and the way you do your day-to-day job. And what I've seen, what we saw in the data was that specifically in high value services categories, category management techniques lag even more. So there's a huge opportunity there. It's a good opportunity though. It's an opportunity to add a lot more value to our organizations.
it's 2020 and digital has been around for a while. We've got that all fixed up. Our systems are all snappy and all the information we need out of them, right?
Yeah, we're definitely going to hit on this today. When we look at the top gaps in procurement talent, digital and analytics are up there, and we'll talk a little as well about just the types of analytics that we're doing, where we're strong and where we still have room for growth.
Yeah, we've actually done a whole Pinnacle study on this. If anybody's interested on just this specific topic around innovation in some of the new technologies, we've actually done one. So a little commercial there, something we did last year, so it's still relevant. What about the risk? Everybody knows that we just gone through a pandemic and the world has changed, and all the risks are different this year. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think, gone through a pandemic, we're still in one, and we are definitely all thinking about risk in a different way. But when we look backwards, at least in a study like this, we see that our baseline for conducting risk assessments is not where it could be, and probably not sufficient for what we know now about risk. I know procurement organizations all over the place have been focused on and had the microscope on their risk management techniques for the last 8 months. So that's going to continue.
And finally here, the last myth here, that we've been using outsourcing to get rid of all the transactional work in our organization so we can focus on the high value work. How's that worked out?
Yeah, so this one is one that personally pains me a bit. When we look at automation and when we look at outsourcing, I think that there's a lot of areas of procurement where there's opportunity to use third parties to accelerate and get over some of these humps that are difficult to do internally. When we look at, Everest Group, for those of you new to Everest Group today, is highly focused on services and outsourcing. And our procurement outsourcing numbers, and I've seen this data for years from other sources as well, procurement outsourcing tends to lag other parts of finance, other functions like IT. So there's a big opportunity there. Not that we need to turn over the keys to the entire function, but just that, using third parties for certain activities, especially the more transaction-based activities, probably offers would take a lot of the headaches away and let us focus on some of the more advanced and strategic relationships that we need to be putting our time into.
Okay, thank you. And so as we move into the next section, we're going to bring in Banushi, and she's actually going to take us through some of the data. So we've got 4 categories here. Let's move right along into the first grouping of that. And Banushi, help us with the data.
Thank you, Michael. So the first aspect that we want to talk about, the major insight from our survey, was around category management, which is a hot topic, and it's going to be widely discussed in this. So before I deep dive into which categories are actually managed well and which are not managed so well, I want to just give you an overview of how we see the category management process as a whole. So the way we see it, it's an ongoing process. You're taking, you're getting, understanding the stakeholders' needs, and you're basically gaining an understanding of the market of the entire category. How are your suppliers positioned? What does your landscape look like? And then you're using all of this understanding that you've built to actually create an action plan. And of course, as Amy mentioned before also, there are best practice tools that you can use to do the same, such as the total cost model and a Porter's 5 forces analysis, which helps you drive more value into the whole category planning process. Having said that, if we move to the next slide, we'll see that as of now, services categories still lack well-developed category plans. Now, this was an interesting one for us. If you see Pinnacle Enterprises, they're still, more well-developed as compared to the other enterprises, which are the blue on this graph, right? Which is the average enterprise of today. But even Pinnacle Enterprises do not have well-developed category plans for the service, for certain services categories such as BPO and legal services, and even marketing and sales services, which is not because of the fact that BPO and legal have less spend, right? It's just because maybe procurement is not involved enough into these categories.
So Banushi, don't pick on those lawyers, because I mean, I know we all.
Yeah. So poor legal services. Over here, legal is doing a little better. This is preferred supplier identification. So you can see the difference between Pinnacles and other enterprises in this as well, especially for marketing and sales services. You can see that there's a 2:1 gap almost in identifying preferred suppliers in marketing and sales services. And just to give you a background of why this is important for the whole category management process, there are two reasons really. One is that identifying preferred suppliers can help you reduce your sourcing cycle time because you already have a set list. You can do a quick tactical RFP and that's it, you're done, right? And the second thing is that it helps you increase the whole compliance. So you don't need to worry about whether your savings is actually getting realized and is flowing through to your budget because you're doing it with your preferred suppliers. Again, BPO, as you can see towards the end, it's not preferred supplier identification is quite low again. So moving to the next slide in this, there are three main metrics, and these are really key metrics that we observed in the whole category management process. The first one, which is right on top there, is the spend visibility at a line item level. So why this is important is because if you cannot see your spend at a line item level, you cannot manage it. It's the first step to the category management process. So even Pinnacle Enterprises over here have 66% spend visibility, which is just around 2/3 of the entire spend, whereas the average enterprise is just at 1/3 of their services spend, which is quite low in our opinion. It was kind of a surprise because, I mean, we typically expect that at least world-class organizations should have at least 90% of spend visibility. The second thing that we saw was how procurement influences total category spend. So you can see here that indirect goods, as Amy mentioned earlier, indirect goods is doing better than services, but both of them have potential to do better in terms of having more procurement influence and involvement in the whole total category spend. The last thing on this is the huge graph on the right, which talks about the category management best practice tools. So total cost modeling and make versus buy modeling. We can see that total cost modeling is still being used. 71% of Pinnacles are using it, whereas make versus buy is only being used by 57% of even Pinnacle Enterprises. And I just want to stress on this make versus buy modeling point here. So when we're typically procuring goods, if you're going to buy office supplies, then it is quite obvious that we will have to go to the market and buy it. There is no chance that we're going to make office supplies in-house. But for indirect services, it is a huge decision whether you're going to make something in-house or whether you're going to conduct your IT services in-house or whether you're going to outsource it. So this type of modeling is very helpful to help you make an informed category strategy decision.
Yeah, that's a great point, Banushi. We see organizations that we work with going back and forth between in-house and outsourcing on every couple of years. There's a pendulum swinging. So having tools to make those fact-based decisions based on data, maybe slow down the churn a little bit, is really important, and it's an area procurement can guide our stakeholders in.
Definitely. Okay, so I think the next slide, we'll just summarize some of the challenges that we saw in the whole category management process. And I won't deep dive into all of them, but after conversations with a lot of procurement professionals with whom we conducted the study, we saw that internal alignment with business stakeholders or budget owners is really still a huge gap, and not so much in larger services categories such as IT and facilities, but it's there at a really large extent with the smaller or the less popular services categories, can't say smaller, like legal services or marketing. So not only is procurement not getting involved frequently enough with the stakeholders, but also they're getting involved later in the strategic sourcing process. And I'll deep dive into that in the next slide. But just another challenge that I want to point out on this page is the third one, which is difficulty in attracting and retaining talent. So this is an interesting one because Pinnacle Enterprises are actually using a lot of non-monetary levers to attract and retain talent. For example, the providing career growth opportunities, or just having a good brand name which is able to attract talent efficiently. Whereas the average enterprise is still using monetary levers to attract and retain talent. The last few points, I think everybody here in this webinar will agree with: lack of time and bandwidth to develop and implement category strategies, and poor data quality. It's the problems that have been there for the longest time and will be there for more. Okay, so the next slide, we give some, I mean, these are of course not holistic solutions, but just some steps that will help improve the category management process. So if you look at the graph, the chart on the right, you will see that it talks about the frequency of alignment between category managers and services stakeholders, and then it gives a brief about which categories are meeting often with services stakeholders as compared to which categories are not. So it's nice to see that BPO and IT telecom, which we cover here at Everest Group as well, are actually category managers are actually meeting regularly with stakeholders quarterly, on a quarterly basis, which is a good practice according to us as well. Whereas some of the categories such as professional services and HR stakeholders are not meeting that often. And looking at the chart on the right, we see that, again, in our opinion, the best practice to get involved in a strategic sourcing process is in the requirements definition phase. But some of the categories, for example, for legal services, again, poor legal services, right? Like the stakeholders, category managers are getting involved in the contracting space, and that does not give procurement any opportunity to drive any cost reductions for the category itself. So just summarizing the entire category management section, just a little 2 cents from our side. Moving to the next slide. The ideal approach is that there should be continuous collaboration in the whole process between the business leads or the budget owners and the category manager, and joint objectives for categories should be developed between them. So this is really a continuous collaboration process and not a one-time activity, as I pointed out earlier. So with that, I'll end the category management section and I'll give it to Amy to talk about analytics.
Thanks, Manushi. Great points on category management. Category management in and of itself is difficult to transition to. It takes several years to overcome some of those challenges, but specifically in services, there's just all these additional challenges, like looking at the legal services, right? We're dealing with professionals who have their preference on how they want to do things, and often are not pulling us in until at the very end when a contract is due, and frankly, legal can do their own contracts if they want to, right? So it's just difficult to make an impact there. So I want to jump into analytics, because we've talked a lot about analytics and where we're going in the future. And there's kind of 2 things that are going on here, I think, in analytics, and they're complicating each other. So the first is that we have aspirations to use more advanced analytics. This is actually more from a different type of assessment that we've done, not necessarily a hard data Pinnacle survey like this one, but when we look at what procurement is looking to do in areas like data analytics, basic analysis has kind of been around for a while, and I'll give some examples in the next slide on what basic analysis really looks like in terms of where we are on basic analytics, what's included in there. Most people consider themselves fairly mature in having adopted that. Advanced analytics, though, is something we're aspiring to do more. So you see a lot of initial pilots of advanced analytics across the industry. But aspirations to be more mature in this in 21 and 22. I always look at these 2-year out kind of forecasts as aspirational. Having been in research for 11, 12 years now, I always, the 2-year aspirations, when we measure that in 2 years, won't look too much different from the 2020 numbers, is my guess. But I don't want to sound too cynical there. So jumping to the next the data that we have from this study, when we look at what's actually being used, we asked specifically about different types of analytics or, activities that could be analytics related. And I kind of break these, the data fell actually very cleanly into higher usage of basic analytics versus what I would consider advanced analytics. So things like a spend cube, this is actually a little bit surprising to me that most companies, the Pinnacles even, are at moderate usage. I mean, every procurement organization that I've ever seen, indirect organization from start, you don't need a spend cube as much in direct, but in indirect, typically the first thing you do is create a spend cube. It may even be in Excel, but there's a lot of pretty inexpensive software that's been around for a long time that'll take all of your data, build a spend cube, and start to show you, waves of sourcing waves to target to get the most spend savings, and then that will kind of self-fund building a procurement organization, right? Pretty basic stuff. Never mind all the spend management possibilities or spend analytics possibilities on top of all of the technology that's available to us today. However, we found that most people are just kind of moderately using that, and maybe they just scored themselves kind of low here, but it doesn't get more impressive as you look across the board. I mean, we all have scorecards, but do we really have well-enabled dashboards for our performance? What we saw is most non-Pinnacles do not. And then when we look to the right, most of the organizations, the blue bars here, are barely doing these, very little usage of things like data mining and self-service analytics for budget owners to be able to see where they stand, or predictive modeling, which is really, one of the more advanced things that we can offer. I mean, just to give an example of what predictive modeling looks like, the best companies that do this are able to look at, use machine learning and AI to look at the past spending habits of their stakeholders. And one tech company I knew would go and do their, beginning of the year, this time of year, they're meeting with their stakeholders to plan out their projects for 2021, and they're able to say, based on what we know about you, this is what we think you're going to need to do. You've got these contracts coming up, you've got these expected changes in the market, you typically go and refresh laptops around December, and they kind of go with not a blank slate saying, what do you plan to do, but with actual data to support that conversation. That gets you so much further in the conversation when you're trying to drive the stakeholder relationship, and not just for relationship's sake, but really get ahead of where the opportunities are. So I think that these numbers are concerningly low. And if we jump to the next slide, it starts to paint the picture around this. We see this gap in talent, and this was a question specifically around the size of the talent gap in your function. There's a number of things going on here. First of all, I think that a moderate gap across all these areas says something, right? And I'm not sure that 8 months of COVID and a recession have necessarily changed this data much from the people that I'm talking to. But there's definitely a lack of things like technical and soft skills and supplier management. But the areas that really stood out were data analysis, or data analytics, and digital skills. So, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? We need the technology, we need the capability, but we also need people who are equipped to do it well. And I've heard procurement struggle for many years now with, do we need a COE? Do we borrow somebody from IT to do our analytics? But they need to understand the data, they need to understand what they're doing, and, really trying to wrap their heads around the talent challenge to enable the kind of analytical capabilities that we need in a function that's incredibly information heavy and has huge potential, but we haven't really embraced it and accessed that clean information. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back to Banushi for the next topic here around how we're handling risk assessment, also an area of huge information availability and challenge in using it.
Yeah, agreed, Amy. And I think risk has become quite a hot topic these days, especially because of COVID and all the associated issues with it. With procurement people literally arguing on force majeure clauses for such a large amount of time as compared to previously. So just want to point out how this risk assessment was done, in the pre and during COVID time. The studies from the beginning of this year, we would really love to see how the data has changed now. But at least from that time, we saw that none of the organizations were doing risk assessments on a quarterly basis. So you can see the 0% for Pinnacle as well as other enterprises. So that basically implies that none of the organizations are actually following the best practice for risk assessments, which is a quarterly risk assessment. Pinnacle Enterprises typically do it at the time of onboarding a supplier and on an ongoing or trigger-induced basis. So when we say trigger-induced, we basically means when something like a COVID strikes or when an M&A occurs, and that is when Pinnacle Enterprises get into the picture. But the average enterprises are not doing that either. So in fact, for the average enterprise, you can say towards the end that 20% are not doing any risk assessments at all for service providers, which was kind of a huge red flag in terms of conducting risk assessments, looking at how hot it's become. So moving to the next slide, we'll see the levels of risk assessment that are typically done by procurement in terms of supply base and supplier risk monitoring. So the first level is corporate risk, which basically covers your own organizational risk, your business continuity, your financial standing, and all of that. And the second and third talk about your supply base and your supplier risk. So the supply base risk covers your location risk in terms of whether the location that your suppliers are placed in, what are the macroeconomic indicators there, and is the government supportive of your business in that country and all of that. And this stuff really matters when you have your supply base concentrated in one particular location that is high risk, and that's when you really need to stand up and take notice of, okay, whether we need to distribute the supply base across multiple locations just to kind of minimize the risk levels. And the last risk is the service provider risk. So the service provider risk talks about your one particular key supplier's risk. So in terms of their financial standing, what is their reputation like? Are they able to conduct operations? Do they have the right talent for it? Are they able to protect your data, information security, and all of that? So continuous monitoring, according to us, is key in the upcoming years across all of these parameters. So with that, I'll give it back to Amy to talk about market intelligence, which is another topic that is we are going to be deep diving into a lot in this particular webinar.
Thank you, Vanishi. So this last topic on market intelligence is the fourth one in here, but probably one of the more important ones. Before we dive into it, I'm going to have Michael take us through a little survey here, just to see where people are in terms of your use of market intelligence.
Yeah, so let's do a quick poll here, get your input in here. And what Amy and I wanted to know was, what types of market intelligence are you currently using? So you can select all that applies. Is there our casual sources, internal contacts, peer networking discussions, public sources, third-party subscriptions to general market intelligence, Bureau, IBIS, third-party subscriptions tailored to a specific category, so Gartner, Forrester, Everest Group. Amanda, if you could open up the poll there, great. And if you can check all that apply here, and when the poll is open, I'm seeing answers come in now, and we'll keep it open for a second. Well, people like to check boxes, it looks like.
Sounds always interesting to me, and we'll talk a little bit more about the results in a minute, but there's so many different sources out there, and I feel like people often underestimate how much there is that's just kind of publicly available, or what I characterize as casual. Somebody who used to work for the supplier and now works internally, and can I buy him coffee and talk about this?
All right. Looks like we got well over half of you've answered the question, and let's take a quick look there. Okay. All right. So public sources. There you go, Amy. Public sources.
Public sources.
Yeah. So public sources number one, and then really kind of a three-way tie for second.
Yeah, so this, the numbers here were over 50% for everything. And I will say 75% almost for public sources. I would hope that everyone is using 1 and 2 because, they're free for the most part. There's some public subscriptions, industry sites that you might have to pay a little bit for. But those are just so readily available. Like I said, just taking out a ex-colleague of the supply, a colleague who's an ex-employee of a supplier or something, sometimes, or somebody in R&D to understand more what they know about the supply base can be a really valuable source of market intelligence. So can, following on groups on LinkedIn that are kind of easily available.
So maybe we should have had a fifth answer here, is have Amy on speed dial. Is that what the fifth is?
I think that's actually in the fourth one here. So, if we look at some of our data from the study on this, I always find this interesting. And what you'll see in this data on the slide is that there's kind of a combination here. Most people are using more. In fact, everybody was using more than one, excuse me, more than one source. So that's why the numbers look like they're all kind of aligned here. It's a mix, right? And we actually asked about more options, but you could kind of group these into the ones before in that previous that poll. What we see though here is that the Pinnacle organizations tended to use more market intelligence in general, and they were definitely more likely to use subscriptions to one of those last two options, right? And I will differentiate those by saying there are subscriptions. Actually, I'm going to hit this on the next slide in a little more detail. There's subscriptions to general providers where they can tell you everything about most indirect and direct categories at a 10,000 foot level, and then there's subscriptions to providers that go deep, the Gartners, the Forresters, what we do at Everest Group, that go 50,000 feet into those categories that they're covering. And there's a difference there in terms of what you're going to get. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but just, when we ask people how they're using market intelligence, there were really 3 pieces that came out. One was for identifying suppliers when you're sourcing. One was for category strategy development. I would argue that that's probably the earliest stage, and you should be definitely using market intelligence then, as well as cost benchmarking for negotiations. So some of these aspects have some aspect of, some kind of data content involved as well. On the next slide, I dug a little bit more into trying to kind of break these out for people, because I get this question a lot. I have worked for at least 2 of the logos on here, and I think there's a lot of differences in the types of market intelligence you can get out in the market. And I will continue to say none of these are mutually exclusive. They're all complementary. On the right, we have sort of what we characterize as free and casual sources of market intelligence. Things like, talking to suppliers or business stakeholders, a number of online message boards. I'm a big supporter of some of the LinkedIn groups, and Procurement Foundry is a newer-ish Slack channel for procurement practitioners, and a shout out to them right now. And it's free as far as I know. I'm not on there because I'm not a practitioner anymore. So peer networking, news sources and industry sites and things like that. But when we think about the paid subscriptions, what I've seen over the last 5 to 10 years is procurement organizations starting to carve out budget to get market intelligence they need, and then kind of challenging themselves with this decision of, what do I need? Do I need organizational best practices to transform my function? Do I need general across the board? Do I need specific deep dives in some of the more category specific research firms? And I think the answer really depends on your spend profile. I think to answer that question, go back to that spend cube we talked about. What does your waves of sourcing look like? Where are your needs? And where's the value that you can add to the organization? If you are, not very deep into, not using a lot of technology, maybe you don't need a Gartner registration. If you're using a lot of outsourcing, that's when understanding that market is important, and Everest Group can help on that. Same with the Barreaus and the Ibises of the world. Really understanding the characteristics of your spend is important here.
So Amy, does this mean that your previous slide there where you showed the Pinnacle companies were buying Everest Group subscriptions were Pinnacle? Is that your new sales?
I did not differentiate. I did not differentiate in the question between us and others. I happen to do. I will anecdotally say that a number of those Pinnacle Enterprises in the top right are outsourcing excellence members, and I'm quite proud of them. And it was really fun to go through the results and say, hey, you guys are doing a lot of the right things, and it's showing. But there's, I did not do a hard data correlation on Everest Group clients.
Yeah, and just to put a little pitch in for you there. I mean, that is what we do. I mean, if you're looking for market intelligence on commercial rates, I think we have a unique source on that compared to anybody else. It's easy to get salary information, but if you're looking to get a good core rate, Amy and teams she works with in the organization can actually get you commercial rates where nobody else in the industry can get those in a database type format that allows you to kind of assess your competitiveness with what you should be paying in the marketplace.
Yeah, we've definitely got some smart people doing price benchmarking in this space, and I know from how hard price benchmarks are to come by in a lot of categories. So I appreciate that whenever I talk to them. So let's kind of wrap this up with, those are the four, key areas that we saw as it relates really to managing categories and managing services better. There is like I said, a lot of other research we'll have coming out of this study. It was a thick study, so I want to thank anyone for who took it. But just, if you are a category team and you're responsible for services and you're thinking about what do I need to do in 2021, this is kind of the wrap up for that. Prioritize these practices for complex and critical services and use technology to improve your spend visibility. This isn't necessarily a category where there's a lot of rogue spend. In certain parts, some categories may, but you don't see maybe certain things, but you're not going to see like lawyers going out and rogue spending on lawyers, right? Or outsourcing services, things like that. But understanding where all the spend is and where the smaller suppliers are, especially when you're in a global organization, is incredibly important to be able to get ahead of it. Prioritizing stakeholder alignment. Again, I'm going to go back because we didn't spend as much time on that, but right now is the time when you should be talking to your stakeholders to understand their plans for 2021. They are planning 2021 and 2022 probably right now. What do they intend to work on? Where can you get involved early? Where can you bring them information from the market or from across the organization that's going to enhance their decision-making capabilities? We're not here to make the decisions, we're here to enable the decisions and make them higher value. Think about your risk assessments. So if you are not doing quarterly trigger-based and onboarding risk assessments, think about whether that makes sense for you. And I think Banushi mentioned that we do quarterly risk reporting on the biggest service providers. That should be the kind of data you're looking for across all of your, at least your strategic and your high risk suppliers. And we could talk a lot more about risk specifically, but it's definitely something to have on your checklist. Look at your talent, right? So think about the tools that your team is enabled to use. Do they have a base TCO model that they can modify for their category? Do they have a framework for make versus buy for services that's modifiable for different categories? Are they able to use those tools to then analyze the information they have, and again, a lot of information internally and from the market, and then present a well-developed strategy to their stakeholder, right? Stakeholders don't want to see the 100-page peak matrix that we publish, but they probably want to see is the top line summary of what it means to them and what they should be considering. They can double click if they want. There's always that one guy who likes to read long reports at night, but for the most part, they just want you to bubble it up and help them understand all this information in the market. And then, leverage market intelligence where you can. Think about where your high value categories are, where maybe you know less, or where there's fast changing. Michael mentioned pricing data. I mean, we know that in IT services, rates are changing every 6 to 12 months on certain hot skills, right? So those are places you want to leverage market intelligence. Do you need market intelligence on office supplies? I mean, we all want to understand what's happening with hand sanitizer, and it's incredibly important right now, but you can think of that in a little bit different way than you do in terms of the total spend and the total value opportunity.
Yeah.
So with
Interesting point on the market intelligence bit. So we've been talking to a lot of organizations about this, right? And we saw that some of the normal other enterprises or average enterprises, non-Pinnacles as we call them, have been leveraging market intelligence, but they haven't been able to drive incremental cost reductions through the use of market intelligence. But whereas Pinnacle Enterprises have been able to use market intelligence, they use it for a wide range of activities as well, and they're able to drive cost reductions from them. So I think this is important to what Michael also mentioned, that price benchmarking and actually driving real savings, measurable savings from the use of market intelligence is also key to really utilizing it efficiently.
Yeah, that's so important. It's not just having information, it's how you use it, right? And making better decisions.
Exactly.
So, let's look forward just as an ending. What are sort of the unanswered questions we have here? What does the future look like? I think there's an unanswered question on how we're going to develop analytics capabilities, how we're going to improve in that area where we have a talent gap. And frankly, we have a gap in what I've often called in my past life, the digital gap of just basic core automation and information digitalization. If we don't have those things, it's going to be really hard. You can have a really nice dashboard, but there's nothing behind it. So that's a big challenge, I think, in the market. How will risk mitigation planning change in the post-COVID world? We mentioned a couple times that this is kind of pre and during COVID. We closed this in like April, May. So, we had an idea of what was going on, but it's not well reflected, the future. And then finally, do we think there's going to be more outsourcing of procurement processes, including some of the routine activities? We've touched on that a little bit, but I think I expect those numbers to change a bit based on what we're kind of seeing in the market. So, Michael, I know we wanted to make an offer here to share our intelligence.
So one of the best ways to get to know Everest Group better, if you're not already a client, is to offer a slice of our data. And so what Amy and her team have done is put up we're going to open up a quick poll here in just a second, but ability to ask for a bit of market intelligence. We've been talking about that a lot as being part of the key on Pinnacle. And she's going to offer up one of 3 different options. Why don't you describe those, Amy?
Yeah, so I mentioned market intelligence so much. That is kind of one of the businesses we're in. We do a lot of things. We have content around service providers. We have insights on locations. We have insights on markets. What we wanted to do is offer up a review of this. Data is great. We are very data-based. You see a lot of pictures of charts here. Talking to an analyst is really what brings it to life, to understand how the data matters and how it might affect you. And so we wanted to offer a review with one of our analysts for there's about 10 topics you can pick in the link there, and one of them includes our new category management report. So pick that if you can't decide on anything else. But go ahead and that should be up now. There's descriptions. You can come back and use that link after. If you click it, open it now and read through them after the webinar, that's fine as well. We'll reach out to you to get something set up.
Okay, all right, so Amanda, open it up, just click the link there. This is for enterprises only, so we're focusing on the enterprise, the buy side of the equation, so procurement organizations themselves.
Yeah, I should have commented that if you're already in our outsourcing excellence program, those members who might be on the phone, you already have access to all of this, so there's no need to click. You got the link, and let us know if you need it. You can always reach out to me or any of our team for a review, but this is really for those who don't have access. I would encourage you to go to our portal anyway. There's a lot of complimentary materials there. There's a lot of blogs. You can learn a lot back in that free and casual market intelligence category. But definitely, happy to share one of these. I actually picked this list based on the things we're getting the most questions on right now.
All right, so we'll close this up here. I was going to have a third option there with Amy's direct phone number, but I thought maybe that was going a little too far.
I'm easy to find online, so.
All right, so let's go on and do a wrap up here. We're going to get to the questions and answers. I see a couple questions here that we can get to. So if you have additional questions, go ahead and put them in chat. We've got time for a couple here. Let me start with the first one here, Amy, that I thought would be good to get a question on. Are there any benchmarks on the savings potential achieved based on the stage at which procurement is involved by category? So there's a couple different aspects to that.
I saw that one, and I think it's a great question. So from this study, the short answer is no, but I'm gonna elaborate because I can't help it. I've done, as one of the analysis I used to do in my previous kind of when I was with one of the kind of world-class, process improvement versus market intelligence providers, was doing an analysis to correlate early involvement and level of spend influence with savings, and it always was a really strong correlation. So the data is pretty strong that the earlier you get involved, the more savings there are available. So I think that although we didn't go into that here, it's kind of complex. You kind of need time, data over time and stuff to really start to prove that out, and more quantification than we did. I would say not only should savings be the focus though, but you also need to look at value. And for example, when we talk about BPO, right? If we talk to our consulting team, and this was a little bit interesting to me, their process is not to do an RFP if you're outsourcing something for the first time. Their process is that you need to have solutioning meetings with a small number of potential partners and iteratively and interactively determine what the right solution is, right? So it's not just, I'm going to put all these expectations on paper and we're going to go back and forth. Now that it's much more involved, and by the time you get to the pricing piece of it, you have a really good idea of what the ideal solution is and the differences between those different providers in a way that you're not going to get from an ERFX RFP. Now that's a big project, right? Outsourcing, say, a function, but it's incredibly powerful to go that route. But that requires very early involvement if procurement is going to drive that. Now, often business stakeholders drive that process. Maybe IT is driving, the CIO is driving that process. But if procurement wants to really be driving the value here, getting involved in enabling that and driving that solution development up front, it drives value beyond just savings. And that's really what category management is all about.
All right. I just noticed on the slide that Amy's address is not really XXX.
Yeah, whoops.
A different person and the organization. Amanda's going to put those in chat for you. So let me go to another question here. What are the best ways you've seen for effective stakeholder alignment? Category management is a procurement view. Business units are focused on different objectives and are accountable by different KPIs. This makes procurement's value proposition difficult to sell. So let's talk about the alignment aspect. I know we've done studies on that in the past, in years of my history.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump on this. We talk a lot about stakeholder alignment. What we haven't really hit on here is the metrics and the measurement part. And that's an area I've done a lot of research in. The simple answer is my philosophy is that your category management metrics need to very closely match your stakeholder metrics. When I do category management training, and the first thing I do is say, write down the top 4 or 5 priorities of your stakeholders. That means you understand what matters to them from their supply base. Savings is usually like 4 or 5, unless you're in a category, a really tough economic situation. So it might be number 1 right now for a lot of people, and that's good to know, but it's not usually number 1. What are those 3 or 4 things ahead of that? Those are the things you should also be measuring yourself on. And that's really what category management is about versus the traditional sourcing execution and the traditional procurement scorecard where savings is the number 1 metric. And I really believe that those category level metrics, they need to be different for each category. They may even be different for different stakeholders in your category. As complex as that sounds, it's important. And then they need to roll up into that procurement scorecard. But you're right, for the person asking that, category management very much is a procurement view. It's the sausage making behind the scenes that your stakeholders don't need to understand all of what we're talking about today. They just need to know that you're coming to them with good information and ideas and enabling the process.
Okay. All right, great. The email addresses are in chat, so if you want to contact us directly, feel free to do that. Amanda, if we could go to the Pinnacle study. This is one of the upcoming Pinnacle studies that Amy and you and your team are doing. You want to just talk 30 seconds on what this is all about?
Yeah, just a quick PSA on this. And I actually see one of the questions in here is about metrics for reporting business impact from sourcing and VMOs. That's actually, looking at how we manage suppliers from both a sourcing, procurement team and a VMO standpoint is part of what's in our next Pinnacle study. It's on strategic supplier management, and it does look at things like performance management, the roles procurement and VMOs are playing, and how we're driving our suppliers for better productivity, better innovation, how they can be partners. So I want to encourage everyone to take that. There should be a link in the chat for that as well.
Yeah, perfect. So again, the Pinnacle studies are mini benchmarks, if you will. They're really almost full benchmarks here on this topic, and we want to close this study, and I think we're trying to close it in the next 2 weeks. So if you could,
early December.
Yep. So let's get your participation in now, and then Amy and her team will be back to talk about the results sometime early
in the holiday week.
Yeah.
Next week.
All right, sounds good. All right, so let's wrap up. Amy, just a 30-second commercial on what
so I mentioned a couple times the kind of things that we work on with specific focus on procurement teams. We've got a couple memberships: outsourcing excellence, that's really about market intelligence; pricing as a service, that's really about price benchmarking on demand, having data ready as you need it. We also do a lot of short and longer term projects, and a lot of flexibility there. One thing that we've really focused in our outsourcing excellence program, and I wanted to show this on the next slide, is taking, we have 175 analysts at Everest Group that are focused on services categories across all different areas, right? We've developed category manager resources that help teams that are going through the process of transitioning to category management or are already managing categories. So if we can jump to the next slide, we've put together a number of different things here. There's a guide. That guide is actually available in that drop down that we sent out as well, if you want to have a conversation about that. We do workshops with our members and support their teams in either specific category questions or how do I put tools together. But I think the most powerful thing that we're releasing right now, we have 6 of these coming out, are templates, PowerPoint templates on categories that we cover. So for instance, digital workplace, which is really like your help desk, your IT support people, finance and accounting outsourcing or services. What I realized when I looked at a lot of our good content is that, again, the person that you're presenting to probably doesn't need to see the 70, 80-page document that you skimmed through, but what they do need is, what you need as a category manager is a PowerPoint that helps you pull in the top line from those research reports and present it in a way that's kind of coupled with your internal buyer intelligence or insights, right? The analytics that you're doing inside of the organization. So we're building these. We'll have 6 of them in December, and then probably about 20 more next year. Banushi's actually leading the charge on these, so I probably should let her talk about them, but pretty excited to get these out. And I think if you're a category manager, thinking about how you take the wealth of information out in the market and boil it into something usable in a simple briefing document for your stakeholders is really important.
All right, Amy, thank you very much. Banushi, thank you very much. This is great insight, helps on this. So let's do this a wrap. I will be back with you guys in about 2 weeks when we're going to start to unveil the 2021 key issue study. This is our time where we are a big study of the year where we ask enterprises and all the participants in the marketplace for that matter what they're thinking about into 2021. I've seen the results; they're pretty interesting. We will have those back in a webinar. I think it's on December 10th. So talk to you soon. Thank you.